Yeah.
Okay, good morning, everyone. Thank you. Actually, before I start, just to remind you to note our timings over the next few weeks. We will have Shiur on Tuesday, but then we enter into Hanukkah, and I think there will not be Shiur over Hanukkah, and then we'll resume for a couple more sessions before we take our winter break. But just have a check over that. Okay, so we are in the middle of the sugya of kosher, and one of the treats of learning Gemara is that every so often one comes across unexpected diamonds and gems, and I think this topic here is one such topic. I didn't expect it to take me where it took me, and it ended up with a really fascinating set of Maramakomas. So I hope I'll be able to share some of that with you today. The Gemara tells us that the Gemara assumes rather that it's a kesher which is almanas lahatir, a kesher where one is kosher almanas lahatir. One is it's not possible that this is a melacha d'oraisa. It's not possible that this is a Torah prohibited melacha, and therefore the source for the melacha of kosher cannot be the tying of the urias of the cloths to the pegs when the Mishkan was set up. So says the Gemara. Now, I pointed out at the end of the last Shiur that this is a fantastically powerful indicator of the authority of Chazal to use svara, and the idea that the derivation of the melachos is not simply a blind, technical, mechanical application of what happens in the Mishkan, therefore is forbidden on Shabbos. Because think what the Gemara is saying. What's the source of kosher as a melacha? Well, we know in the Mishkan, they tied the urias, the fabrics, they knotted them to the pegs. Says the Gemara, that can't be because that's a kosher almanas lahatir, that's tying a knot with intention to unravel the knot, and therefore that can't be the melacha. What do you mean it can't be the melacha? If it happens in the Mishkan, and the Mishkan is the source of melachas, then on the contrary, adrabah, that should teach us that kosher almanas lahatir is a melacha. And the Gemara is not prepared to tolerate that. It says it can't be a melacha, and therefore this can't be the source of the melacha of kosher. And as the Gemara is taking upon itself the authority to determine that certain actions are too trivial to be melachas, and therefore this cannot possibly be a melacha, even though it occurred in the Mishkan. Much like many other things that took place in the Mishkan which aren't melachas, the Leviim walked from place to place. Inside, there's not a melacha because it's not it's not carrying from one place to another place. So this is the premise of the Gemara. Nonetheless, that's what I said last year. Nonetheless, we need to ask ourselves, what is this svara over here? Why is it that kosher almanas lahatir is not a melacha? And basically what I'm going to try and explain in this Shiur and probably the next Shiur is three ways of understanding this. And the structure will be that we are initially going to adopt one model, which I'm going to argue is too extreme. We're then going to explore another model, which I'm going to argue is too extreme, the opposite way around. Thesis and counter-thesis, and then when one arrives at synergy, when one arrives at the middle path in the middle, I'm going to argue that we need to take a more nuanced approach. And basically, the three models I'm going to look at, in model number one, I'm going to argue that this is merely a reflection of halachas that we find in all the Lamites malachas, that they have to have a degree of permanence. We're going to demonstrate that this is incorrect, it isn't comparable to other malachas. We're then going to go the opposite extreme and argue that this is a unique feature of a kesher, of knot making. And I'm going to argue we've gone too far in model two also. And there's evidence that pushes us to the middle in understanding what this concept is. So that's just an outline of what we're going to do over the next Shiur or two. We're now going to spend some time exploring the general concept of melachos and permanence in melachos by comparison to other melachos. I'm going to argue that the comparison breaks down. It's not sufficient to explain our sugya. And then we're going to swing to the opposite extreme of looking at this as a unique quality of kasha, and then hopefully find something in the middle. So here goes with model number one. Now, one way of understanding kosher almanas lahatir, if you do a knot with intention to unravel the knot, that one is exempt, one is pater from the melacha, is because there's a general rule of melachas that they need to be a melacha that is a melacha shel kayam, a melacha that has a degree of permanence to it. And in the Maramakomis, I tried to find the simplest or most accessible sources I could to give examples of other melachas where this phenomena is true, where we find there's a concept of permanence as a necessary feature of the melacha. So one of the Maramakomis I gave was the Gemara, the Rambam in Perek Tes Masechet Shabbat, Halacha Yud Gimel, where the Rambam says that if one dies with a dye that doesn't have a kiyum, that is einoi miskayim, one is exempt from, one is potter, one is exempt from the melacha. And then the Rambam says this is a general rule. The Rambam says v'chol she'ein melachtu miskayemes v'Shabbos potter. Any case where one's melacha is not kayim on Shabbos, one is exempt from the melacha. So Rambam says this is a general rule, and that's why one is potter from seveya if one uses a dye that isn't permanent. Now, where does the Rambam get this general rule from? So the Magid Mishnah, which I also printed in the source, sends us to the beginning of Perek Haboineh, where the Mishnah says a klal, zeh klal. Any case where you do a melacha and the melacha is mitkayem, has a kiyum, mitkayemet, has a kiyum on Shabbos, has a permanence, one is chayev. And any case where it doesn't have a permanence, then one is potter. So zeh klal, says the Mishnah, this is a general rule. The Rambam extrapolated from this rule to general halachic principle. That's a melacha which is not mitkayemet, which doesn't have a permanent, one is potter. So far we are on good territory. We have the authority of the Rambam and the Magid Mishnah who explains the Rambam to us that this is indeed, and this is correct. We're not going to back off this. And there is a general rule with melachas of miskayemes. That's not going to prove to be controversial. What will be controversial is the application of this rule to the melacha of kosher. I should add, and I apologize, in hindsight, the source I gave you was a little confusing. I did print the Rashi on the Gemara, simply to say that Rashi has another pshat in what this rule of melachta miskayemes means. Rashi says, sheyesh miskayemes kiyotaba, that you sometimes, Rashi understands it to mean that you sometimes leave the end result as it is. However, the aim most for now, and you don't add to it. However, if this is merely an intermediate step, but no one would leave what you've done at this stage, and is not complete as a step in melachas, that wouldn't be a melacha. So I don't want to go into details of that now because I guess it's not really relevant here, other than to say even the translation of this phrase, ein melachta miskayemes, is controversial. Rashi has a different translation. But the Rambam understands it to mean, according to the Magid Mishnah, that a melacha needs a degree of permanence, and it's only a melacha if it's permanent. This is a klal, a rule in all the melachas of Shabbos. And therefore, it's taught to us by Boiner, but the Rambam applies it to Soveya, and this is a general principle. Now,
sorry, could I ask? Sorry, I know you don't want to dwell on the Rashi, but I just wanted to ask: is that a stira with the Rashi in our Gemara on Ayin Gimel? Because there he seemed to be talking about the permanence of the knots on the nets, that you would leave it done.
It's possible it's a stira. Or it may be, which will be our model number 2, that Rashi understood that kasher is different to other melachas, which is what we'll get onto. So, in a sense, this is the topic here. To what degree is kasher merely an application of a general rule, or is it its own thing? I should point out, by the way, that poskim extends this to other melachas, so it doesn't remain just unique to Boina and Seveya. For example, in the melacha of Koseiv, there's discussion. I can't remember if I printed a source here. Did I give you the Chayadam? Yeah, I gave you the Chayadam. I don't want to go into the Chayadam now with too much length, other than to suggest if anyone has time, it's worth learning through the Chayadam. But the Chayadam speaks about this general application of this halachic principle and applies it to other melachas, such as Koseiv. So this is a general principle. Now, my first attempt at learning the Gemara, when I came into this sugya, and I've learned this sugya on many occasions before and not been properly ma'ayin, not learned the sugya with appropriate depth, I now realize in hindsight, I always assumed that this rule of kosher was an application of the general principle. So there's a general principle of kiyum melacha, and I didn't unpick it, unknot the sugya with too great care, and therefore I assumed this was a general application of the principle of melachto miskayamet. Now, if this is correct, we now have a rule that we can establish. And the rule is, from our Gemara, that which determines the permanence of a melacha is not just whether intrinsically it's permanent. So Tzeveya or Kosev or Boina, the question is the dyeing, the writing, the building, is it permanent? Is it strong? Is the dye held fast? Or will the dye eventually fade? Is the writing good quality writing? Or will it eventually fade? Is the building a strong structure, or is it a temporary one which will collapse? But in kosher, in this melacha, you see something more. You see, even if you make a strong knot, a knot which has a degree of permanence to it, nonetheless, if it's al-manas lahatir, if your intention is to intervene and unknot it, then it also isn't a melacha that has sufficient kiyum. It's within the principle of ein melachto mitkayemet. The melacha doesn't have kiyum, and therefore one is exempt from the chiyuv. So if there's enough gemina in practical halacha, if you understand this rule of kosher as part of the general principle of whether a melacha is miskayemes or ein miskayemes, it teaches us that the determinant of whether it has a kiyum or not is not just whether mitzad atzmoi, from the intrinsic quality of the product I produced it has a permanence, but also whether mitzad the person, even if the product has a permanence in and of in itself, but my intention is to intervene and unknot it, I remove the knot, that would also be sufficient to make it an impermanent melacha, and therefore one would be potter. So this is...
Was that according to every opinion, Rabbi Zobin? I thought not every opinion said it was dependent on the individual whether he was going to untie it later on. Some opinions said as long as you intended to have it for a period of time, that itself creates enough of a kiyum.
There's 2 points I want to make of it. The first point is that for now, I'm assuming that kosher is an example of the general rule of needing a melacha having a kiyum. If it is an example of the general rule of a melacha needing a kiyum, then since our Gemara says that intentionality means it isn't melacha miskayemes, we can extrapolate that to other melachas. If we see that that extrapolation is incorrect, and that generally it doesn't depend upon your personal intention, but it depends on the intrinsic quality of the work done, then it would turn out that what's going on over here with kasha is not part of a general rule of melachas, but it's something unique to kasha, which will be our model number 2. So Hagufa, that's the discussion here. All I'm saying now is if we fall into what I think is a trap as it happens, but if we take the general rule, which we've seen established by the Rambam, that all melachas need permanence, we say, great, that's what's going on over here. With kasha, it's an impermanent melacha because I don't intend to keep it. And we think kasha is merely an example of a general principle, then it would turn out that the general principle is not determined by the absolute quality of the work, but it's determined by my intention. That's the first point I want to say to you, Adam. The second point is that when we talk about permanence, we need to be quite careful here, because the sad fact is that nothing is permanent on this planet of ours. Nothing is permanent in this life of ours. We certainly don't mean by permanence that something is going to last forever. So there has to be some measure of permanence. Obviously, if one's intention is to leave this up for a period of time, I say obviously, but one would presume at some point this does become permanent. There's no dye in the world, and no writing in the world, and no building in the world that's going to stand forever. So when we talk about permanence, we definitely mean some shear or other. And therefore, the fact that we find in the poskim them saying as long as it lasts for a few days is enough, may be taken simply to mean that this is a sufficient degree of permanence to fulfill the quality of melachto miskayemes. But we will indeed look at this in a few moments. So this is the model we're going with for now, that kosher is an example of a general rule of permanence, and we see from the Gemara's assumption that if it is al-manas lahatir, you see that it is considered impermanent, even if the knot is a fantastic knot. It's a jolly good knot. It's a knot that's very strong, but nonetheless, my intention is to unpick it shortly. That would also be enough to make it non-permanent.
Could it be the intentional permanence? So obviously nothing, like you said, is going to last forever. But if, let's say, I double knot my shoelace with the intention to unknot it, compared to building a building in which I hope will last forever, could there be the intentional permanence versus, at some point I will unknot this or destroy it?
So that is a superb comment. If we're talking about the absolute permanence of something, how strong a die is it, how strong a writing is it, how strong a building it is, then there isn't a clear digital on-off determinant of what we would consider permanent. Nothing is permanent. The question is how quickly it will fall apart. If we're dealing with intentionality, there is a model to put forward that's digital, that's on-off, which is with the knotting of my shoelaces, I don't want it to be permanent. I intend to undo it. Whereas with my house, I know sadly that one day it will fall down, but my intention is for this to be as permanent a building as possible. So that distinction is very, very important, and we'll come on to that.
Isn't there a question on this, the whole concept of permanence? 11 of the melachos are in Sidura de Pat. And quite apart from the fact that we're going to eat the bread, these are all steps on a journey. Gathering the wheat together, isn't permanent. It's a step in the road. It's a step in the road. What's permanent about picking the stones out of the wheat mixture? What's permanent about reaping? Even what's permanent about sowing, because you're sowing in order to harvest in the end.
Yes. Yeah, so this again is an excellent comment. In truth, I think you're right, and what I'm trying to share here is I think an overly superficial model of what miskayemes means. I share it simply because it's the journey I went on in seeing Kesher Shel Kayama and assuming it was part of a general rule. But I would say 2 points. The first point is that the melacha that is done in let's say boren, picking the stones out, or in teichen, when I grind the grain down to flour, in a sense is never undone. It's true it's not permanent in that my intention is not for this to be maintained as flour, but it is also true that the end product bread has permanently in its makeup flour. Flour is a necessary step towards getting to the end product. And therefore, at least when I was initially learning the sugya, I ignored your question because I assumed this was enough for miskayemes, because my intention is never to undo the melacha. My intention is to continue along the path of the melacha. Now, even bread, where the whole point of making, let's say, take the last melacha in Sidura de Pat, which is baking the bread, my intention is to eat the bread. Nonetheless, my intention is never to undo the melacha. My intention is to eat the bread, which is the culmination of the point of the baking. And therefore, I didn't consider your distinction to be one that unduly troubled me. In hindsight, I think I was overly glib about that, and it did need more careful thought, and I'll try and share why I don't think this is enough. But this is why I was happy to go with the flow of the Gemara as I understood it.
And you say maybe that in Sidura de Pat, the very fact that there's stages, then once you go on to the next stage, it's as if the previous stage has been permanent.
And that's exactly what I'm saying, and that's how I'm trying to answer Edward. I'm saying that you never unravel the cleaning out of stones, or you never unravel the grinding. You use it. That's the culmination of the grinding, is that it's embedded in the flour for the next stage, which allows you to make it into dough. And even the eating is not al-manas to unbake it. The eating is al-manas to eat it, which is the culmination of the kiyum of the melacha. That is the use or purpose or end goal of the melacha, and therefore I assume there's no problem of miskayemes in that case. But in a sense, this is bringing out the superficiality of my original model, in which I was just sort of trying to apply the rule of miskayemes blindly, and I wasn't thinking more carefully that each scenario of miskayemet needs to be considered in the context of its own melacha. So in a sense, this is ruining the punchline of, it seems that everyone else got here far ahead of me. But for me, this was a long and stressful journey. I didn't understand till model number 3 that the concept of miskayemes needs to be applied with much greater care than ours applied. And in each melacha, you need to think what it means in the context of that melacha. And Edward's question brings that out brilliantly.
I think that is the general principle, that learning across from melacha A to melacha B to melacha C is something that has to be done very carefully.
That is one of the general principles I'm trying to bring out in all our learning. Almost every sugya, actually, I make this mistake. And almost in every sugya, I start off trying to apply the insight and rules I got from other melachas to this new melacha. And in every case, those rules of other melachas are relevant to the new melacha, but need to be applied with a lot of care by thinking about what the essence of the melacha is. And that's exactly the journey we're going to go on. We're going to go on today. Okay, so for now, I'm still mid-journey, so forgive me my errors. I'm taking a general rule of miskayemes, which we've seen from the Rambam as a general principle, and therefore I assumed that the rule of almanas lahatir is part of a general application of this rule. By the way, I saw latter-day Sephorim that argue that this is the correct model, and they bring another example of where you see intentionality as relevant. And I'll tell you what they say, and then you tell me whether you think this is a good comparison or not. There is a very important teshuvah of the Ramah. The Ramah, besides writing his primary halachic work, which is his footnotes on the Shulchan Aruch, also wrote teshuvahs. He was a Rav, and he wrote responses to questions that were asked of him. And in my my Wednesday night shiur, which I give to the shul, called Pasha and Halacha, we just finished not long ago the halachas of writing, of kosher, and I mentioned this teshuvah of the Ramah there. In the olden days, it seems that on the binding, not on the binding, on the leaves, on the ends of the pages of the books, they used to have writing. So if you have a book, I'll just take a book, a sefer that I have over here, there would be writing written along the sort of end leaves. So nowadays, I think you sometimes find very high quality Sforim where there'll be like a pattern or a paintwork over here. I don't think I've ever seen one which has actual writing over here, but it seems they used to write lettering over here. Sometimes people would write it themselves also. They would write the name of the sefer here, for example. So it's convenient that from this side, you could see what the sefer was. So the question that the Ramah discusses is, are you allowed to open and close such a sefer on Shabbos? Because as you open and close it, you are breaking up the lettering and writing. So this is a very interesting halachic teshuvah of the Ramah, and it applies nowadays. It's applied nowadays to lots of situations of temporary writing, because the Ramah argues that since your intention is impermanence, it is designed to be opened and closed. This is not a melacha miskayemes, and therefore this is mutter. It's not a permanent. You plan to open and close the sefer, and therefore you're doing neither moichik, erasing, nor kosev, writing, when you open and close the book. Someone just posted here on the Singer's prayer book. They used to have this lettering on the side of the that side of the thing. Okay, I didn't know that. So this is a Ramah about kosev, and it's applied to lots of other scenarios of temporary writing. So, for example, digital thermometers and things like that, where the writing is designed to go on and off. The modern day postscript attempt to extrapolate from this Ramah important principles. Now, in a contemporary sefer, I saw them apply this Ramah as evidence that in the same as kosher almanas lahatir is not a melacha, similarly, kosev almanas limchik, writing in order to erase, or mechik almanas limchik, where your plan is just temporarily to open and close, would not be a melacha, and therefore use this as evidence that you can extrapolate from kosher to other melachas. What do you reckon, gentlemen of the jury? Do you think this is a good comparison or not?
Well, you got specifically, you have mochek almanat lichtova. That's one of the in the Mishnah, so I don't see how that can work.
That is okay. In the terms of mochek, that's because it's a mechicha to clear the surface in order to write, and then that would be the culmination of the melacha. You're not undoing the mechicha. You are. It's a permanent mechicha in order to create a clean surface to rewrite. Here, the point is that the mechicha is temporary because you're going to get the same lettering coming back. And that's the Ramah's argument.
It seems to be about the functionality versus objectivity, whether it's still there, right? If you open the book, the writing's still there. You haven't removed it per se, but it's now no longer legible.
So I think what you're saying is right, and I particularly like the word functionality. I don't believe the Ramah is relevant to our discussion at all. It is true that when you open the book, let's go with the assumption of the question, and I'm going to tweak very slightly what you said. When you open the book, the writing is gone. Let's say you open it completely and you fan out the pages. There's no way to read the writing. When you close it, the writing comes back. I think the Ramah's argument is that opening and closing the book, to argue that this should be malacha, would like be arguing that opening and closing a door is boina. Now, it is true when you open and close the door, you are putting up, erecting a barrier and removing a barrier, putting up a wall and taking away a wall, opening and closing a window. Why is that not boina? Because it is permanently hinged and designed to be opened and closed. So this isn't a malacha because the Ramah's not saying that this is, that with Kosher U'Matir, the knot is permanent. There's nothing intrinsic in the knot about it. My plan is to unravel it when I next meet a journey on the journey, and therefore the Gemara says it's too impermanent. As opposed to the book scenario or the door case, where the functionality, the design of it is to open and close it. So in that situation, so that's not a malacha, that's simply opening and closing a door. So I don't believe the case of opening and closing the book is relevant to this this scenario. However, I do think there are number of pieces of evidence that kosher is different to other malachas, and that one shouldn't extrapolate from other malachas to kosher. And I'll just tell you one piece of evidence because we're running out of time. And in the next year, we will learn the Yerushalmis together and other pieces of evidence. One piece of evidence is that in general, an impermanent malacha is potter aval osa, whereas kosher al manas lahatir, an impermanent knot is mutter. And we know this, right? We make impermanent knots, and there's a problem over here. Kosher al manas lahatir is mutter, as opposed to other malachas where it is potter aval osa. So that's just one piece of evidence that this comparison is overly superficial. And I will share it in the next year as we learn the Yerushalmi together, other items for this. So we'll stop there for today. I wish everyone a good day, and I'm very much looking forward to continuing this on Tuesday.
Scott, thank you very much.
Thank you.
Go ahead. Thank you.
Well, thank you.
Thank you. Have a good